And I started to do methamphetamine on a regular basis. I was doing anywhere between 10 to 20 pills a day. This went on for about a year, and I was still functioning, working wise. Mentally wise, I was a basket case, right? At the same time I was doing all of this, I was teaching for the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Justice privately, and I was teaching at the Chief of Customs in Klong Toi privately, being high on methamphetamine at the same time.
Well, hello there, Internet. It's Pete here from Thairish Times. What's the story? I hope you're keeping well. So back by popular demand, you requested a part 2, so that's what I've done for you. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed a man named Glen from Canada who spoke about his involvement in human trafficking and organized crime in Thailand. Well, Glen is back for part 2. And in this interview, Glen's going to talk to us about how he dealt with a methamphetamine addiction and how he overcame it. He's going to get into a story where he worked along the Thai-Myanmar border teaching refugees, which sounded like a very dangerous job. He's going to get into that in this interview. And then he's going to tell quite a funny story of how he paid a dowry to his Thai mother-in-law, and I thought that was quite a funny story that made me chuckle. So yeah, without further ado, folks, let's go straight into the interview. And if you do like this interview, leave me a like and a comment and subscribe to this channel. And if you know anyone out there who has an interesting story, hit me up, thairishtimes@gmail.com, or else get me on Instagram at thairishtimes. Right, let's do it. Glen, we got you back again. So in the first interview, I'm going to quote you. You said, "I've done a lot of things that's put me on the edge in Thailand." Okay. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. Let's delve more into that, into your life. So some of the stuff we're going to talk about today is going to be dark. Some of it is going to be lighthearted. We're going to see where the conversation goes. But when we were trying to figure out an idea for what this video was going to be like, you mentioned meth addiction is something that you struggled with in Thailand. I'd love for you to kind of get into that story, how it began, you know, the ins and outs of meth addiction.
Well, as from before the first video, I had mentioned where I was involved with the people moving business and so on. During that time, I had started to use methamphetamine, the Thai methamphetamine, yabba. And I was using it on a regular basis. But as things progressed with my so-called people moving business, the stresses and some of the problems that I had overcome, traveling around the world, getting arrested and so on. The last trip that I had done, I got caught in Antigua in the Caribbean. And I got caught with 2 Chinese nationals that we were trying to get into Canada. Anyway, to make a long story short, I ended up sitting in prison for 2 months. And during that 2 months, my business in Thailand was failing, right? Because I wasn't there to do the teaching. I was teaching out of my home, right? So when I got back from Antigua, all my students had left. My girlfriend at the time had decided to pack it in with me, right? Because she couldn't handle any more of the people business, right? So I took it really bad, and I started to do methamphetamine on a regular basis. I was doing anywhere between 10 to 20 pills a day, and doing that and dealing with all of my outside teaching contracts and with the loss of my house and my business and my girlfriend. It just got really, really bad. So I ended up moving into an apartment behind ECC Latpro. And while I was teaching, I was still doing amphetamine, but I would do it before work, go to work. I'd be high all day on amphetamine. And then in the evenings, I'd go home and redo amphetamine.
How were you able to function? Like, how were you able to teach if you were high on meth?
Well, the method they have in Thailand is not the same as what you would see in North America, where they call crystal or ice, right? It's a lot milder form. It doesn't really affect your impairment, or it doesn't make you impaired, right? It makes you more wide awake and alert. But after you do 5 or 6 pills, then you do start to get high off it, right? I used to get it through my motorcycle taxi driver. I had the same driver all the time, right? So my driver would pick me up in the morning, drop me off in the evening, take me to my contracts, right? Pick me up after my contracts, and I would get him to get my methamphetamine for me. This went on for about a year, and I was still functioning, working wise, mentally wise. I was a basket case, right? And the community that I was living in behind ECC, they all knew because everybody talked, right? They all knew that I was on methamphetamine. So they finally put a stop to it. They talked to my motorcycle taxi driver and to get him to stop supplying me. And then they talked me to move out of my apartment and move into one of their houses, which was down the street. Really, really hospitable Thai people. Like I couldn't believe what they were doing for me. Um, and the house that I moved into, uh, the owner of the house was a Machi, a female, like a female monk, and she had all the Buddhist amulets and the Buddhist statues, and she was right into Buddhism. And she made me meditate every day. While they gave me a place to stay, they gave me a room to live in, right? And the only things that I couldn't do is I couldn't do any more methamphetamine, and I couldn't go back to my old life until I had cleared this and done my Buddhism and done my meditation and so on. So I was with them for, I'd have to say 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and they detoxified me completely. And at the end of my detoxification, they took me to a temple, and the temple was in Lapra, and they did a ceremony called Sadak Kok, which is they take your spirit, they kill off your spirit and bring you back a new spirit. So I had to lay down in the temple in front of all the temple people. They put a white robe over me. The monks did a big chant for me, right? And I was on the floor for about an hour. And when I took the blanket off, I was supposed to be cleansed, right? And from that point on, I had stopped using methamphetamine and got my life back and got my everything. Got my new girlfriend. I got settled into Thailand. I got my jobs back. Everything came back to me, right? It was a real good step in time, right, to help me out.
And that period of your life, that 1 year period where you were really hitting the methamphetamine hard, like talk us through what your typical day. You'd wake up, pop some pills, and then go teach, or what were you doing?
No, what I would normally do, I'd wake up around 6 o'clock in the morning. My first classes would be usually 8 o'clock, 7:30, 8 o'clock. Um, I would smoke 3 or 4 tablets on some tinfoil. My motorcycle taxi driver would pick me up at the house. We'd go to my first contract. I'd teach 2 hours. Then I'd drive back on my motorcycle back to my place, right? Do 2 or 3 more tablets, right? And then go off to my next contract. And I used to do that every day up until 8, 9 o'clock at night, 7 days a week.
And could you sleep?
I could sleep because I was taking a lot of Valium at the same time, right? So at nighttime, I would dose myself heavy with Valium so I could get a good night's sleep. And then in the morning, I'd start the process all over again. And at the same time I was doing all of this, I was teaching for the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Justice privately. And I was teaching at the chief of customs in Klong Toi privately. So I was doing these two contracts, two very influential people, and being high on methamphetamine at the same time. I think they knew, right? But they never said anything, right?
That was my next question. Did anyone ever know like that you were high on meth when you were teaching?
The only people that knew what I was really doing was the motorcycle taxi driver and anybody that was close to me. Like obviously Paul was my friend. He knew that I was involved in this and I was addicted to it, right? But other than that, nobody else knew, right?
When you look back at your life now, all those years later, how do you feel about that period of your life?
It was a really bad time for me because I had let too many things get out of hand. And I was becoming violent. I was becoming very mouthy. I was getting into fights. I was getting into all kinds of stuff. Looking at myself and with the respect I have for Thai people and their culture, I was totally offside, right? I wasn't in the right frame of mind to really be in Thailand at the time. But if, like I said, if it wasn't for the Thais, right, I probably still wouldn't be here today, right?
And when you got off the methamphetamine, what was your next step? How did you get your life together?
Well, when I was at the Temple House, right, they had told me because I'd just broken up with my girlfriend. I'd been with her like 8 years. Um, I was really concerned that I wouldn't ever have another girlfriend. That I was feeling sorry for myself. I was down, and she was the whole world to me. And they told me that don't worry, there's another one in line to meet you, right? And we can feel her. She's trying to meet you. And it's funny, at that time I was teaching at a university as well. And one of the girls in the canteen liked me, right? So, and that's who my future wife is now, right? So after I had gone through detox and after the ties had helped me and so on, I met Natia, who's my wife now. I met her and I got myself an apartment, and things started to go better from there because Natia, my wife at the time, or my wife now, she didn't do drugs. She didn't do anything bad. She didn't even smoke cigarettes, right? So she made me kind of change my life around, right? In an inadvertent way, right? And that's where it all started. From being with her, I started to get better. I started to work harder. We took a more of an interest in my relationship in my house and got rid of the people moving business or human trafficking, as some people like to say, right? So that's where it all started. That's how I started to get back into my routine, back into my life. And then from there, we ended up setting up a gemstone lapidary in Canterbury, where we sourced rubies and sapphires from Kashmir, from Burma, Australia, Madagascar, from basically from around the world. And I focused myself on doing that project really well.
Okay, brilliant. So we actually touched on that in the our first interview. So I'm gonna move it along now to there was a part of your life that you were working for the Australian embassy along the Thai Burmese border. Can you tell that story? Because you touched on it last time. We didn't go into any detail on it, and it must be fascinating. I mean, anything to do with Myanmar always fascinates me anyway.
I was working for Hawk, I can't even remember the name of it. It was a university in Hoi Quang, and in the university they had an English language center of Australia, which was a joint venture with the Australian Embassy and the Australian Education Council. And one of the outside teaching projects that came up was to teach on a Burmese refugee camp in Maysot, just up the road from Maysot, Mae Sariang. I applied for the position. It was going to be 6 months in the jungle. I thought it'd be a wonderful opportunity, right? Which it was. And looking back, right, it was a really wonderful experience. Um, so because I had IELTS training and I was an IELTS examiner, plus a head teacher at the time, they felt that I was suitable enough to go into this refugee camp to do this language training program. And what it was is, for those people who don't know Burma, Burma has roughly 50 different ethnic groups within the one country. Like there's the Wa, there's the Shan, there's the Karens, there's a lot more. There's about 50 of them, ethnic groups, right? And what they did was they chose a location in Thailand next to the border. And what it would be a training program to help the students who ran away with the protests in 1980. And at that time, the military had taken control of Burma, and a lot of the university students had run into the jungles to get away from SLORC, the military junta. And they had been in the jungles for 10 years already. But a lot of these people that were in the jungles, they were only halfway through their education, their university degrees when they ran away. Australia, what they decided to do was to take, instead of them fighting with guns and dying in the streets, the Australian embassy decided to help these refugees better by bringing them into Thailand and then teaching them their IELTS so that they could get their IELTS and then go to Australia, a university in Australia, and then come back to Burma and fight that way with an education instead of fighting with a weapon. So that's what my mandate was to bring them up their IELTS skills up to a level where they would be able to get into a university in Australia through the help of the Australian embassy. So this project, well, it ended up going on for 2 years. And what they did was each individual ethnic group in Burma, they selected 2 or 3 students from that region. And those students from that region walked all the way to the camp in Thailand, right? And a lot of them walked anywhere up to 2 to 3 months to get to this program.
And what was it like along on the border? Did the army, the Burmese army at the time, did they find out about this, or how did they know anything about it?
They found out through their sources and spies along the border. Now, along the border, it's basically just wild wilderness, right? You have a dirt road that heads up from Mae Sot all the way up to Mae Hong Son. And then the Mui River goes right along that road. And the Mui River is the separation between Thailand and Burma. And the river itself is only probably 50 feet, 100 feet across, right? So any of the Burmese refugee camps that are along that river on the Thai side, the military junta, which is SLORC, would be positioned on the mountains on the other side in Burma, and they could see all the camps, right? All the Burmese refugee camps. They weren't impressed that the Australian embassy had set up this training program for all these ethnic groups, right? They used to send in spies. They used to send in village people with letters for the camp leader, right? They're going to kidnap the teacher or kidnap the camp leader or rape and burn down the huts and whatever, right? It was on a continual basis, right?
And did they know about you being in there?
They only knew I was in there. And their biggest thing was they wanted to come kidnap me, but at the time I was like 250 pounds, right? And the only way that they're going to get me out of there is carrying me, right? I couldn't see them carrying me, right? I was too heavy, right? But it was scary. It was scary.
And were you the only foreigner in there?
Yeah, I was the only foreigner there, right? It was interesting. I was there for 6 months. They built me a wooden bamboo hut to live in, which had a little balcony and a bedroom and stuff. I had my own washroom. One of the village people used to cook me food every day, so I'd have a meal. And then we had one big bamboo hut, which was our language classroom, right, which was on top of the hill. So the village itself had anywhere between, I'd say maybe 1,000, 1,500 people in the village. We were 10 kilometers off the main road. So it was a 10-kilometer walk into the jungle. And surrounding us, the KNU, the Karen National Union, they had their military, which would control the refugee camp. And then outside of that perimeter, we had the Thai military who would control the whole camp and make sure everything was safe and sound, right?
What year are we talking here?
It had to be around 1994, 1996.
Did a lot of those people, did they end up making it to Australia to finish their education? We
got about 50% through. Another 50% ended up moving on to different refugee camps or different situations. It was such a hard life, because the SLORC, the military junta, they were always trying to burn the camps down, right? They didn't like the idea of Thailand opening up their borders to bring in these refugees when they could use them as porters and for supply routes and stuff, right?
So, Glenn, you left Thailand in 2007. All right. Let's get into your life after that. How has your life been after Thailand? Because a lot of people leave Thailand, and Thailand is a magical place. You can't compare it to the West, really. It's just special. And did you have the same experiences, the same adventures when you left Thailand as you had when you were in Thailand?
No, coming to Canada was a real eye opener. Like I said in the last video, when I was in Chantaburi before we came to Canada, I very rarely spoke English, right? So a lot of my English skills had dissipated. It had basically gone away. When we moved into Canada, from day one, from coming through immigration, I had a huge problem coming through immigration. It was easy for the wife and kids because we'd done their paperwork ahead of time. But because of my life in Asia, they wanted to know too much, right? Which was the first step into Canada. And we found that everything here in Canada is very structured. It's not so easygoing and say la vie, say la va, like in Thailand, where you can do anything you want, really. You can get up and teach, or you can take a day off and do this. Here's a lot more different. The weather was probably the biggest thing for us because when we came to Canada, we were in Winnipeg here for about a year. The weather here is about -30 in the wintertime. And we ended up moving up to the high Arctic. And we were in the high Arctic for 5 years. And on average, it was -60 every day, right? With 100-mile-an-hour winds, right? For the wife, it was quite a challenge, right?
That's some difference from Thailand. What were you doing up there?
I was looking after a hotel up there, right? It was interesting. My wife had never seen snow before, but had never seen snow 20 feet deep before, and to see Canada through her eyes was a real mind blower, right? Because the cold, she had never experienced anything cold like that. -60, right? With 100-mile-an-hour winds, you're looking at -80 with the wind chill factor, right? With polar bears and no sunshine. It was dark for 6 months of the year, right? And then it was sunshine for 6 months of the year. So that was interesting. All of the sights and sounds of Canada has been really interesting. I can't say I'm impressed with how the work is over here and just the way Big Brother, your government is overwatching you all the time and stuff, right?
So overall, has she adapted? Your Thai wife, has she adapted well to life in Canada over the years?
Oh yeah, yeah. It took her probably between 3 and 5 years to get her English to a level where she could have a conversation, she could talk, apply for jobs, look after herself and so on, and have her own way of life, right? It's taken a while, but she's finally transitioned into it. She has no plan on going back to Thailand. However, I do, right? But not.
She doesn't want to go back.
No, she loves Canada here now. She's got a good job. Uh, she has educational opportunities, right? The kids are here. Kids can go to university here or in Thailand or whatever, right? So I'm going to go back and stay with her family, right? While she stays here in Canada.
And how does she feel about that? That's a big move for a married couple.
Yeah, it's a big move, but we've been together for 24 years now, right? We've been together for a very long time. And it's not like we're going to be separated, day in, day out forever, right? Every 6 months she can come and visit me or I can come and visit her, right? That's what we're planning on, right?
And where in Thailand are her family from?
Ubon Ratchathani, up in the northeast, right? It's beautiful up there.
Have you built a house up there?
We have a house up there. We have about 4 acres of rubber plantation, which is all set to go for us, right? So, my son would love to live over there. My daughter would love to live there with me, right? Um, but we've got to get through this period, the separation first. I get settled in Thailand, my wife gets settled here on her own, and then we can start traveling back and forth, right?
And Glenn, can I ask you, do your kids know about your past with the human trafficking, or AKA the people moving business?
They know. I've always been very open and very honest about my stuff, right? They know about it. They just don't understand the legal ramifications of it, like what it actually means and what kind of trouble someone could get into by doing that, right? They don't know that stuff. They're still too young about that.
Let me just read out a comment because we got some interesting comments in the last video. So kind of the gist of this comment was that you know, you're just a criminal and you should be in jail instead of proudly talking about your life. How do you feel about that comment? Now, that was probably the minority of the comments. I think probably 80-90% were definitely loved the story, loved your background. But some people would view the people moving business, human trafficking, as a despicable act, you know? What do you think about these type of comments?
They really don't bother me. Um, I I I saw the business for what it was. You know, I've like I said before, I had never seen anything in terms of violence towards any of the people that we had moved from one point to the next point. Also, like I said before, a lot of the people that were being moved for a specific purpose. Like some people, some of the gentlemen that I took over were just looking to get over to Canada or America to be with their spouse because their visa application had not passed, right? Some people had gone to work in the sex industry, yes, but they were people who had already signed a contract, already had a contract, already done a contract. They knew what they were getting into. There's so many various aspects to that industry or that business, right? Or human trafficking, as they call it. Some is good. Some is another way of just helping someone get out of a bad situation and into a better situation. Some, you know, I've heard stories where people are moved against their will. Now, that obviously happens, but how it happens, I have no idea because I just can't see someone being transported through multiple airports, through immigration officials who are trained to spot all of this stuff, right? How they can be being transported forcefully without being caught. I just can't see it, right? So these people who give me these remarks or whatever, they don't know. They weren't there. They've never seen the situation. They're only going by from what they've heard, right? Through media sources and so on, right?
So, Glenn, when we were discussing different ideas for this video, one of the ideas you sent to me was obviously you married a Thai woman and
Yep.
you had a Thai style wedding. So what was particularly interesting about this wedding?
Well, the whole thing was interesting, to be honest. It was quite funny. Um, my wife, she asked me. This is when we were first seeing each other. She asked me to come up to the village to meet her family. So I thought, well, that would be okay. I wasn't thinking like a Westerner, you know, that we're going to get married or whatever. They want to meet the parents want to meet the groom or whatever. So I decided to go up to meet the village, right? And when we got up there must have been at least 800 people waiting for us to arrive because they wanted to see the white person for the first time, right? So that was the first interesting thing. And anyways, that day I got to meet the parents and I got to meet the grandparents and I got to meet the aunts and the uncles in the village and the townspeople and the mayor and the fire department, everyone, right? And that night we had a big party. And in the middle of this party, four monks walked in. And they walked into this house party. And what they were there for was to set a date, for a wedding. Now I had no idea about getting married. I wasn't even in my mind at the time. I had no money. I just had an apartment, right? And I hadn't seen any of my family in at least 30 years, right? So I wasn't thinking about no marriage and whatever. Anyways, as the night progressed, the monks settled on a date, which was November 17th, right? Which would be the best day for us to get married. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I don't want to get married. I'm not ready for this, right? Then the grandmother came to talk to me and she asked me about how much I was going to pay for a dowry, right? I was thinking, oh my God, here we go, right? I said, I didn't want to say, I'm not marrying your daughter. I just kind of kept my mouth shut, right, and let it go. And anyways, in the end, it was going to be one cow, 3 pigs, and 100 chickens, and 140,000 baht worth of gold, and 100,000 baht in baht. So that's what we settled on, right? Now, I was settling on all this stuff, and I didn't even have a pot to piss in, right? I had no money. I'd come up on a one-way ticket, right? Anyways, after the next day, when we finished talking about all this stuff, I was kind of to myself, I thought, maybe this is what's supposed to happen. Maybe this is how you're supposed to get married. It just kind of falls into place and so on. So the mother came to me and she says, now that you are engaged, she was doing this in Thai, right? Now that you're engaged, Natia cannot go back to the city anymore. She can't see you until you get married. So I thought, well, that's a little bit tough, right? Because we both worked in the city, right? So from that day on, they kept Natia in the village before I could see her again. And it would, then next time I would see her would be on the wedding day.
Until you paid off the dowry.
Until I paid off the dowry, until everything was all set and organized, right? So I went back to Winnipeg back to Bangkok by myself. I had no idea where I was going to get this money. I had no idea where I was going to get a cow and 3 pigs and chickens and so on. I had no friggin' idea. So I phoned my sister, and I hadn't talked to my sister in 30 years. And I phoned my sister, and I had to borrow $10,000 off her after 30 years of not talking to her.
And did you tell her the reason why you wanted the $10,000?
Yeah. I told her. She thought it was a good idea that I get married and get away from the people moving business anyways, right? Because I had used her name a few times, right? And she got in trouble with immigration a couple of times, right? But because she gave me the money for the wedding, she had to come to the wedding. So we brought my sister over for the wedding, right? It was bizarre. We paid off the dowry. We got the pigs, we got the chickens, and I got back up to the village. There was probably the wedding day itself. There was probably around 3,000 people showed up for the wedding. The whole village shut down. My friends came in from Canada. We had a big party in the village, right? The party went on for 3 days, right? It was funny. It was funny. The wedding was very, very interesting, right? We had a parade. We had 2 elephants at the beginning of the parade that took me to the house, right, where she was at. This is so weird compared to a Western wedding, right?
Did you have to pass through different stages or the gates where
where
the friends set challenges?
Exactly. And they also had one where I had to go past these gates and they had to wash your feet. And everybody would have a chance at washing your feet, right, before you went into the house to get married, right? So I had all these people washing my white feet, right? It was funny, right?
It comes across to me, after someone who spent 12 years living in Thailand, that you've immersed yourself in the culture. I can see that you have a love of Thailand and a love of the people. You talk, I can tell you speak highly of people, and you immerse yourself in the culture. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So what is it about Thailand? Like, what do you love about the country?
I would have to say, to be honest, I'd have to say the freedom. I find Thailand very, very free. And when I mean free, I mean it's like I don't have to worry about being hungry in Thailand. I can always get something to eat. Thais are very, very hospitable people. Even the temples, you can go to the temples, you can eat. There's food available, there's fruit available. There's if you ever need any help or assistance, it's always there, right? The Thais are very, very good that way. Whereas in Canada, like I've lived in the area I live in, I've been there 12 years now. I don't know any of my neighbors. Nobody talks to each other, right? The neighbors don't talk to each other. Where Thailand's very sociable, right? You can sit down with your neighbor, have a few beers, go and talk to some other people. Here over here, we don't see that, right? It's really all up to you here. And the weather is much nicer in Thailand too than just the general. Because I speak Thai fluently, um, I understand Thais a lot better than I do Western people, just because of the amount of time I've been there, right?
It's a hard question to answer, but how would you compare, say, Thai people and Westerners?
I find Westerners are very closed-minded, where Thais are very open-minded. They're able to see the benefits and the negatives, the positive and the negatives about any given topic, whereas Western people will focus more on the negative and less on the positive, right? From when they're hearing. Also, Western people are very structured, where Thais are more easygoing and liberal, so to speak, right? At least I find they're more polite, they're more cultured. Uh, Thais have a better way of dealing with things too. Like for example, if there's an accident or whatever, Thais have a good way of dealing with it by talking about it, looking at the positive side of things, right? Whereas Westerners will always look at the negative and everything will be in a negative fashion, right? That's what I find the difference between the two. What about you?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm finding society to be definitely harsher. People care more about themselves than other people. Whereas I find in Thailand, people are just generally very, very kind and considerate of other
Yeah,
people.
that's right.
And it's just, I just can't understand some over here how people can be so self-centered. I think after me spending 12 years in Thailand, I feel like maybe I'm too nice, and because the West is dog eat dog.
No, that's right.
You got to be tough. And I'm coming
That's
back here
right.
and I'm thinking, I spent most of my adult life in Asia. I've
Hmm.
definitely picked up the culture of being relaxed and considerate, but maybe that's not maybe those are not the tools that you need to survive in the West.
Oh no, that's right. A lot of the stuff I learned in Thailand I can't use here, right? Because it's just over their heads, right? You know.
So, what about your old mate Paul Wallace? You mentioned a couple of stories about of the pair of you back in the day. Is there anything that you want to tell? Any other stories about you and Paul that you want to share with us here?
Well, I can think of one story, which I'm not going to say it was Paul, right? But it was a friend of mine, and we used to go to the bars all the time, right? We used after work, after school, after teaching, we go to the bars. We'd hit Soy Nana or Soy Cowboy or whatever, and some of those some of those nights we'd end up with a partner, so to speak, right? Anyways, this one guy, he was newly married, had a couple kids, right? Anyways, he was going to the bars and he'd pick up these girls, and he decided to bring one home. Now he had a wife at home, right? So he decided to bring one home, and he brought one home, and he introduced her to his wife as the new maid. So he hired this this bar girl to become his maid. And every time the wife had turned her back, they were playing around all the time. This went on for at least a month and a half, right? I don't know how he did it, right? And the wife didn't know what was going on. It was really funny. We'd all go over and have a few drinks and then just watch everything went on. It was funny. I've never seen anything like that before. Right? That was bizarre.
And how did it end?
Didn't end very well. So the wife found out, and the boy was grounded for the rest of his life, right, so to speak, right. That was funny.
Well, Glenn, look, I think we'll leave it there. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and look, I wish you all the best in whatever your future endeavors are. I
Thank you.
do think you should start a YouTube channel and document your time in Thailand when you go back. I think people would be interested to hear your stories and your life and your adventures. That's something to consider.
Okay, thank you, Pete.
All right, take it easy, Glenn. Nice talking to you.
Yeah, nice talking to you too, Pete. Bye bye.
Bye, bye, bye.